Just preparing, setting up. Okay, we are ready to go. Shalom, this is Gidon Ariel, and I'm happy to be here with my good friend, Dr. Richard Booker, on this lovely early day in December, recording on December 9th, 2024. How are you, sir?
Well, we're waking up to a new Middle East this weekend and this week.
Oh, it's crazy what's going on.
Wow. Uh, it's so exciting to see God behind the scenes, working all things according to his redemptive plans and purposes. His counsel shall stand, and none shall stay his hand. Hallelujah.
Of course, everything is done with God's hand and stand and reprimand and whatever other words you got in there. But it seems quite clear that this is stuff that no no human could have come up with. And even if he did, then it's only with God's putting it into his head. I'm a
That
big
is
believer. I'm a big believer that every man, every person, of course, has free will. But when things come to tectonic movements in international affairs and global affairs, then God has a lot more to do with that person's free will.
Of course, we'd have to go down to the next layer of discussing that, but on the surface, what you said, that's the way I believe about things. And I've had 50 years of stumbling along with God, observing his ways. And there are some things in life at the international, national level,
Uh-huh.
excuse me, and in your own life that you just can't explain. And if you are a believer in the Bible and the God of the Bible, the only other alternative is God must have done this, you know. So there's just some things in life that you can't explain that happen that you would never. I mean, Peggy and I've had so many experiences in our life that happened for good that we would never dream up ourselves. And even if we could, you just said it, we could never pull it off anyway. It would never happen. So your only alternative is, well, we're just all some big coincidence of life with no meaning, or there's a God in heaven who does have a meaning and purpose for your life. And if you cooperate with him, he'll pull it off for you.
And if you don't cooperate, sometimes he'll do it anyway.
Absolutely, but you'll miss the blessing. But you know, it's always bittersweet because in Syria, most of the actors involved there are bad people. But it's also you have to rejoice in seeing somebody so evil as Assad to finally fall on his own sword, maybe, or whatever he did. I'm sure the Russians helicoptered him out to Moscow somewhere, and he's living in a penthouse somewhere. But
I'm not so sure about that, but maybe that's what people are saying. At first,
but
at first we were hearing that his plane took off and it by accident crashed. But whether he crashed or whether he's living somewhere else, he is becoming, he's not the leader of Syria anymore, and he doesn't have his finger on atomic, biological, and chemical warfare weaponry.
an evil, evil man, and good riddance, and somehow may God moderate those who will replace him.
The idea of not praying or not hoping or talking about or wishing for any of Israel's enemies to fall, saying, well, whoever replaces them will be only worse. So far, we've seen a lot of Israel's enemies disappear this past year. And I don't see that the ones replacing them are that much worse at this point. So far, that we barely heard of them.
Right. Well, I
I think a
understand.
lot of them, when they after the guy who was eliminated, that they are next in line, they don't answer the phone. After that, they don't want to be called, "Hey, it's your turn. Come on down."
Well, I that is so true, and it's uh, it's an interesting world we live in, and if you don't have a biblical worldview, you have no idea what's going on. But if you do have one, you can certainly be encouraged.
If I may go back to a topic that we touched upon a few moments ago. I
Please.
don't know. I don't know if we talked about it in the past, but it is a very important topic in Jewish thought, and that is free will. How much does I know that there are topics in Christianity, a belief in the tenets of Christianity, in whatever. We won't go into all the other things, but what I'm talking about is the idea of free will. That is something very important in Judaism, and the opposite, I think, is true in Islam. That that believe there is no free will. But
Right.
I'm wondering because I can't think off the top of my head if I'd ever heard of what the Christian position or positions are regarding that concept of free will versus God's omniscience, his knowing all.
Yeah, we discussed that some time back, you and I, and my understanding of the Bible, which is our only source book of truth, is that God has a perfect will and a permissive will. And his permissive will is what you're calling our own human free will to choose. Choose you this day whom you will serve. It's right there in the scriptures. So we do have choices to make, and our choices certainly have consequences. And we can be forgiven of these choices, but unfortunately, the consequences don't go away. We still have to live with them. So we often make bad choices and have bad consequences and blame God for it when He didn't have anything to do with it at all. It was our own free will that made these choices. But in my understanding of Scripture, God has a perfect will of redemption. And this is what I call God's red line. And He will not allow His permissive will for us to cross His sovereign red line. So He does allow us to roam around. I think I used the illustration with you in times past of the animals at the zoo. In large big city zoos, the animals have a little room to roam around, but there's some great big divide that keeps them from the people, you know. And so
You're
to
saying that
me,
there are some activities that God does not give people free will to do.
well, I'm saying there he has a red line of redemption of his
I'm
purpose.
trying to paraphrase what you're saying.
Okay, so I guess that would be fair enough to say it that way, yes. So, you know, uh, Iran might get a nuclear weapon or they may not get a nuclear weapon, but they're not going to destroy Israel. Israel is God's red line. Let's put it something specifically we can get a hold of here. So he will allow evil people to do evil things. Uh, the story of Joseph always comes to my mind. but God overrides the evil, even though He allows it. If it gets to the point of crossing His red line, He will put an end to it, and but He will use what evil happened for greater purposes. And He's outside of time, so He sees the end from the beginning. We're in time and space, and these things are very distressful for us because we can't see the big picture that well. So we just had in America the big Thanksgiving, Macy's big Thanksgiving parade, right? It's always
Okay.
a real fun thing. So you have all these people down at the street level watching the parade go by, and they can see one float at a time. But what if you were on top of the Empire State Building? Peggy and I have been on top of the Empire State Building. That's a scary place to be, I can tell you what.
It
Wow.
depends on if the windows are open or closed.
No, don't get too close to the edge. But if you're on top of the Empire State Building watching Macy's parade, you can see all the floats together. You can see how it all is set up and organized. You can see the first float and you can see the last float all at the same time. So, using human examples, which is all we have, God's on top of the Empire State Building and he can see the whole parade going by at once. And he orchestrates, he allows the parade to go by, but if he sees that one of the floats is getting out of order, he will step in and make adjustments. I'll put it that way. That's how I understand it.
In some cases, he's going to let the human make their own mistakes.
Well, he always does, but up to a point. Up to a point.
Always does, but up to a point means that at that point and further, he doesn't.
Well, that's if it's infringing on his will in heaven that he has for time and space, he will stop it there. Absolutely.
Okay, so what you're saying is similar in different words than what I might say.
I think so.
I'm wondering, again, to say, well, if it's in the Bible, it is what it is, and everything that's in the Bible has the same level. But I'm wondering if the concept of free will is one that gets how high the billing it gets in Christian thought.
Could you rephrase that, please?
In Jewish thought, that like for example, there are certain concepts that people ask me about, that Christians ask me about, because they're such important concepts in Christianity, or at least in something that they would ask me as a Jew. And I say, listen, maybe this way, maybe that way. I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up. And so while a free will based on the large amount of activity and thought it got by Maimonides, who is one of the arguably the most impactful Jewish thinker in that impacted today's Jewish thought. So he pays a lot of attention to free will.
I think Christianity is a big deal. It's a huge thing in free will. Yeah, absolutely. But it is tempered with the sovereignty of God. That he again, and the only way I know how to explain it is he has a red line that he's written in his own book, of life. And one of those red lines is Genesis 12, 1 to 3,
So I
and the Jewish
again,
people.
okay, so now you're bringing in your Genesis 1, 2, 3, while other Christian thinkers and explainers would not bring in that verse so quickly. So that okay, but they bring in other verses. Everything's all right. I think, but though that you had the word "but" over there. We believe in it, but up until the point. But red line. I think that while I think that my understanding would be, I believe in absolute free choice, and if there are theological issues, then they are deserving of a longer answer than just just a tweet, just a short answer. And the answer of I don't know as a human is also an acceptable answer. But the concept and the belief in absolute free choice, in extreme free choice, is one that I subscribe to. Notwithstanding, and this maybe is where I paraphrase what you say, the that Milachimu Rosnim, kings and leaders or something like that, that they ultimately, in certain aspects, do not have free choice. I think that God wants a certain history to happen, and therefore certain leaders must behave in a certain way. And so God takes away their free choice, just like he did to Paro, King Paro in the book of Exodus. He hardened his heart. God hardened his heart. So if God hardened Hafetz and Bashar Assad's hearts, or if God softened and strengthened Benjamin Netanyahu's heart because he was in the right a certain place, and God said, "Listen, you're the one in the place, so you're the one that has to go according to script." While if Gidon decides to take a car, or if he does take a bus, then that's not such a big deal.
We probably are agreeing, just saying it differently a little bit.
I think so.
And when it says God hardens Pharaoh's heart, for me, it 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 I understand that, and I'm not saying I'm perfect and understanding everything at all, but I don't see that God's putting down some big stone in Pharaoh's heart or something from heaven, but that he allowed the circumstances of his world to develop in certain ways that Pharaoh would have to choose, and he hardened his own heart. That's how I would understand it.
Well, but except that in some places in the Bible it says that concept a few times, and in some places it says that Pharaoh hardened his own heart,
No, I understand.
and in some places it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So when you're saying, well, God hardened Pharaoh's heart means that God made a way so that Pharaoh could harden his own heart. Well, didn't he do that in the first time when he just said that Pharaoh hardened his heart?
Well, let's
Not
put it this way.
necessarily. One of the understandings, according to Jewish understanding, is that Pharaoh used his free will to make bad choices, and there's consequences to those bad choices. As anybody who's ever raised children knows, that consequences is another name for punishments. And so his punishment was that he would not have his free will would be shortened or mitzumtzam, not enlarged but shrunk,
I would say,
maybe to the point of limited.
I would probably say the same thing, but a little different. I would say because of his evil and hatred, he was overcome by his own hatred, which, you know, put him in his own straitjacket of hate and godliness. I'd probably saying the same thing, but a slightly different way of saying it.
Well,
But the bottom line is God is going to have his way, and we can cooperate or not. That's the bottom line. So here I'm talking to you, and I'm saying to you, my friend, that you are God's red line.
I'm God's red line.
Yeah.
I'll take that as a compliment. What did I do?
And that's nothing to do with you. It has all to do with who he chose. And
Israel, yes.
of course, when I say you, I mean the collective you. The Jewish people are God's red
Yes.
line.
Well, we can see that in our generation. You've been around the block a few times more than me. So your view, your where the floor of the Empire State Building that you're looking at is a little higher than mine.
I understand, and I appreciate that.
And so you're able to see things like, again, I think that from 1948 and from 1967 even more, people are excited more about how God is using his strength to steer world history focused on the Jewish people.
Well, absolutely. I've written a number of books on that same
Exactly.
subject, you know,
Exactly.
and I
But
think that, the rebirth of Israel is such a huge thing.
for sure.
Christianity inherited, I'll put it that way, inherited a replacement theology about the Jewish people. And the reality of human beings is theology or teachings are perpetuated from generation to generation to generation. Doesn't matter what it is, if it's science or math or theology or geology, it doesn't matter what it is. Things
Mhm.
are perpetuated, and most people uh, just accept what they're told because life has so many challenges. They don't have the time nor inclination to search it out for themselves. So somebody comes along and says, "No, this is not what the good book says," But they're not welcome in the family because they're challenging the establishment and the status quo for centuries. And then all of a sudden, Israel is born in a day, as Isaiah prophesied when Ben Gurion stood up and read that Declaration of Independence. And all of a sudden, Christianity said, "Wait a minute. We've learned for centuries that these people are no longer relevant in God's redemptive plans and purposes. But that's not what's happening here. Let's re-examine the scriptures." And the rebirth of Israel has been one of the most refreshing, greatest wake-up calls for Christians to re-examine what they've been told for centuries regarding the Jewish people, replacement theology, and things like that. So, thank you for being there.
I'm wondering how what the Christians who weren't woken up yet felt in the early 40s and in the late 1800s with pogroms and stuff like that. At what point did some people say, "Well, this is the beginning. I'm putting my bets on Israel because at some point the state of Israel is going to be founded," like Herzl prophesied in his own book of his diary at the first Zionist Congress. I'll just mention that you're nodding your head, but maybe some of our viewers are not so lucky to know that a Theodore Herzl, who convened the first Zionist Congress conference in 1897, yes, in
97,
1897,
97.
he wrote uh, in his diary in Basel, which is where that first Congress was held, Basel, Switzerland. I founded the Jewish state, and he wrote, today nobody would believe that, but in 5 years, and certainly in 50 years, everybody will agree. And 50 years later was 1947 when the UN voted for a Jewish state, and less than a year later, the state of Israel was actually declared. So
November 29 to be exact.
November 29th, 1947, and May 5th, 19. 48. Is that the Hebrew, the American, the English date, or is it May 4th? May 14th. May
May
14th.
14th, May 14,
I'm
1940.
used to the Hebrew date.
I understand. Well,
And
I do want to say this though, and I wrote a book called Christian Jews in Israel Standing Together in Troubled Times. It's a very
mhm,
important book, maybe 85 pages or so. But one of the chapters, and Christians don't know this, and maybe Jewish people don't know this. One of the chapters is on 10 Christian Zionists who predated Herzl. And so there were uh, Christians leaders in the 1800s, long before Herzl came along, uh, who read the scriptures for themselves.
yes,
And in fact, Sir Isaac Newton, one of the greatest scholars of all time
that's
in
right.
science, and was an ardent Zionist, but you couldn't say these things; they would burn you at the stake.
And there was no yet word for the word Zionist yet.
No. And so I have my book here on my shelf. These 10 Christian Zionists. One of them was an ancestor of George Bush, actually.
That's right.
But one of them, I don't remember his name exactly. I have it here. He was burned at the stake by the Catholic Church because he dared say that one day the Jews would be regathered back to their ancient homeland.
Wow.
And so there were leading Christian Zionists, we call them today, of their era, but they were so outside of the accepted norm of what was to be taught and believed that they were marginalized or murdered. Actually, some of them were. But so there's always been some people who would search the scriptures for themselves and were in some kind of leadership role of their world who wrote about these things long before Herzl.
When
Uh,
did you write? Again, that was one chapter in a larger book, and well, not much larger. You said it was 87 pages, I think you said.
I'll have to turn my back to you a minute. Let's see here. Um, I don't want to take the time that's on the other bookshelf there, but yeah, it's 10 Zion. One of them was the founder of let's see, well, I'm drawing the YMCA, I think, way back a long time ago, but I can't remember. But I have their names right here, and I wrote about a page on each one of them. You know who they were and what they said, and
I'd
the
certainly, I'd,
influence.
I'd
The,
certainly love to see that, of course. And I was going to ask, and when you're mentioning this, I was going to ask you, well, first of all, when did you publish that book approximately?
oh gosh, I can find it right here if you give me another minute. But
Take your time. Take your time.
okay, all right, hold on.
You've got another 47 seconds. Take it.
I have it right here.
Yeah, I seen that book. So when
Okay,
was it published?
I'm looking here. This was in 2014.
So I think that that was published around the same time that we're talking about 10 years ago.
Yes.
I think that was about the same time. No, no, I'm not sure that the Friends of Zion Museum was established in Jerusalem.
So this is about 110 pages, something like that.
Okay.
And okay, here we go. I've got their names here. Well, here's a guy, uh, Francis Kett, Kett. 1588, my goodness, to 1589, a minister in the Church of England. Uh, he was considered a heretic. Among one of his statements, considered to be heretical, was a statement that the Bible promised a return of the Jews to Eretz Israel. For writing such heresy in 1589, Ket was burned at the stake.
It's amazing.
Yeah, 1500s, you know. I've got the Pilgrims and Puritans here, Sir Isaac Newton, 1733. Joseph Priestley. These were leading scientists of their day. These were not, street people. Lord Shaftesbury in the 1800s. Reverend George Bush, 1844. Here's Jean Henry Dunant, 1866. He was the founder of the Red Cross. That's what I was trying to say. Hmm.
Right.
He wrote about these things. Here's a woman, Mary Ann Evans, in 1876. She wrote a book you might be familiar with, Daniel Deronda. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It
I've
was,
heard of that. Yeah.
well, she was a woman, so she couldn't put her name on the book. So she wrote under a pen name. George Eliot is a
Mhm.
famous English
Wow.
writer. William Hessler, of course, Hessler helped Herschel. So, and then I have Balfour's name down here. So these were people long before, hundreds of years before Herschel.
In some
So,
cases,
but they were always outside the mainstream of the establishment and were rejected.
until this day.
Until today, they would somebody would make a statue of them, so anyway, I'm just Peg and I are so blessed that God has let us be alive for such a time as this. I
Amen.
know that the International Christian Embassy in 1997 they held a Zionist Congress in the same meeting hall in Basel there
Wow.
in 1997, and I was not able to be there, but I'd written about a 60-page booklet called "The Time to Favor Zion Has Come," from Psalm 102, 12 to 16.
Yes.
And I was honored and grateful that they, in their program, which was in German for whatever reason, most of their program they asked permission, which I granted, was quoting from my booklet, "The Time to Favor Zion Has Come,"
Interesting.
was a major part of their program for all the delegates.
Very good.
Yes. So,
Well, it is amazing. And as we talked this, when we started about a half an hour ago, talking about God's plan and free will, you are certainly, sir, using your free will to aim towards God's plan
well, with his help,
with his
from
help.
from your mouth to God's ears, may it be so.
Amen. So I hope everything is going okay with you.
Peggy just had her 83rd birthday a few days
Happy
ago.
birthday.
So we're celebrating that, and have to do a funeral of a friend this week, so that's a sad thing.
I'm sorry
And
to
then
hear.
going up to McKinney with our friends there that you know well. We're
I'm
having
sorry. The funeral has to do with McKinney?
No, this is in Houston. Then I go get with Paul and go up to McKinney, and we're having a graduation for some of my students up there.
Like
So
whom? Maybe
I
I know
have
some of them.
their little diploma,
How
that I've
nice.
done for them, and we'll go up and be giving a little speech with all the people up there.
How nice. Wish I could be there. Please send my fond regards to Paul and to everybody else over there in McKinney, too.
Okay, God bless.
God bless, sir. Shalom, shalom.